You're listening to the 40 Fit Radio podcast, dedicated to the 40-plus community. Join us as we discuss the truth about fitness and health using science, reason, and the experiences of our host and content experts. Welcome to the 40 Fit Nation. So welcome back to the 40 Fit Radio, and welcome back to the 40 Fit Nation. I've got Coach Trent here.
40 Fit.
Yeah, and
What's
myself,
up?
Coach D. And we're going to talk today about another one of the lifts, which I love. We've been talking about the compound lifts. Today we're going to talk about the deadlift. And we're talking about the deadlift, the conventional deadlift, not the hex bar deadlift. That's not a deadlift, by the way.
No.
Or the sumo deadlift. That is a deadlift, but it's not what we teach regularly. But the conventional deadlift, and we're gonna explain the model today. We're gonna talk about the value of the deadlift as a compound lift and how we can use that in our training.
But before we get there, let's talk about this royal blue shirt that Darren's wearing. His eyes are just popping. They're piercing
Beaming.
blue. Yeah,
That's
you're giving Dr. Pewter a run for his money. He's got those baby blues.
Well,
but,
in the 40 Fit logo, we have some blue, some royal blue. My shirt is royal blue. My eyes are a deep sea royal blue, piercing the very darkness of man, and they're gifted. They're gifted. They're gifted eyeballs.
Yes.
But they are blue, and all my kids' eyes are blue too. So it's got that Irish eyes, So yeah, man, I love the deadlift. I think the deadlift is one of those lifts that gets a crazy bad rap, mostly because of misuse, misprogramming, and misperformance or poor performance, incorrect form, and then the deadlift gets the bad rap.
Right.
As the injure of all backs.
Right.
And
as we pointed out in a previous episode, you never lift more than 10 pounds.
Yeah, exactly. And so, the funny thing about here's the funny thing about the deadlift. Here's why I think the deadlift gets the worst rap of all the compound lifts, even the squat, is because the deadlift allows you to be able to handle enough weight that if you do the deadlift incorrectly long enough, or maybe in one single incidence of a very large load in comparison to your strength base, then it does have the potential to do more harm than, say, a shoulder press or even the bench press. Even though the bench press can be heinous on the shoulders if done incorrectly. And we'll talk about the bench press in the next episode when we release it. But the deadlift, you can lift a whole heck of a lot of weight.
Yeah, it's true. When we train up a rank novice who's never lifted before, and they come in for their first day and doing a barbell startup, they are going to deadlift more than any other lift.
Yep.
They're going to put more weight on the bar for that lift, sometimes significantly so.
Yeah.
Than any of their other lifts.
And we're going to accelerate the progression of load faster.
Yeah.
And so, it's very likely that a novice male will be lifting in the threes very quickly.
Right.
Way over 3 plates. And a female will be lifting in the mid twos fairly quickly. And so it's a lift that because of the mechanics of the lift and the simplicity of the lift, it's a movement that the body can do fairly easily with heavier loads. And so, I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think the deadlift gets a bad rap. And I think we have vilified the deadlift. Medical professionals, doctors, many trainers won't have their clients do the deadlift anymore. If you're a trainer and you're not having your clients do the deadlift, I don't know if you really understand personal training.
No.
The deadlift in some form or fashion is of significant usage, and it has great application to human function, as we use that word functional with air quotes, and it should not be deleted from any strength program, barring a handful, and I do mean on one hand, diagnoses or conditions where you shouldn't be loading the spine like that.
Right.
And there's very, very few things that I wouldn't load the spine with.
Yeah, I have to think that the deadlift it's got to be one of the oldest human lifts, because long before the barbell was invented, we know humans were lifting stones.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both recreationally and to perform various types of labor.
Sure.
I have to think that, along with the press, it's probably one of the first human movements that we've done with load.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, we didn't, in primitive man, we had no tables. They would use a stone to put something on and then lift it off of a stone, maybe.
Right.
So, but everything had to be lifted from the ground height usually. So yeah, I mean, it's an extremely primitive movement, functional movement, very simple movement. But I think that trainers and the medical profession has vilified the deadlift. And so there's this narrative that's been created, and I'm going to do a podcast coming up soon on changing the narrative on the way we think about strength training and exercise. I've been thinking about this a lot. I've been reading several studies. I started reading another study today on back pain and changing the narrative, and how people think they know what they know about let's say back pain, and they really don't know what they think they know. So we've got to change the narrative. We've got to change the value system that they have before we'll actually get them to potentially engage in the right type of activities that can get them better, that can get their back pain to be manageable and usable and functional in life. And so it's the same thing with the deadlift. I mean, it's been vilified because, number one, it's been done with terribly poor technique. Terribly poor technique.
If you haven't seen the video of Dave Castro trying to deadlift, it's either 405 or 500. Yeah. Go look that one up.
Yeah.
That's about as bad as it gets.
Well, I mean, all you got to do is go to YouTube and put in deadlift, poor form deadlift, or deadlift
gym fails,
gym failures, and all that. And it's terrible videos. And I, barring maybe a 1 rep max at a huge meet. And even then, I think there's a significantly unsafe lift that you should not be performing, deadlifting incorrectly. But barring, some significant valued event like USSF Nationals or USAPL Nationals or the Worlds or something like that, your form should be stellar most of the time. Even during training and even during heavy singles and heavy doubles in the gym, your form should be stellar all the time. Poor technique is the number one reason why people injure their backs doing deadlifts. It's not because the deadlift is a bad exercise,
right,
or a bad movement.
And truthfully, as we'll get into, the deadlift is simple enough to perform even under fatigue that there's no excuse for not having good form.
Right.
Unlike we allow a little bit of leeway for something like the squat because it's complicated. There's complex. Right. It's difficult to perform. Right. But really, a deadlift is a very simple movement in comparison.
Right. Well, and the other thing is, I think here's the second reason why I think the deadlift has been vilified. Number one, poor technique. Number two, no model. No coaching of a model. No coaching is another one, but no model. There's been no framework, no blueprint of how to deadlift. Now, the beauty is that Starting Strength has a 5-step lift model that works wonderfully, that anyone can be taught. I've never had a client who couldn't do just about 99% of all the parts of the deadlift in the first session. We might have to modify some things based on real significant flexibility issues. We might have to have them pull, a few inches off the top of the floor or do rack pulls or something like that because they just can't get into the right position. But that happens very seldomly.
Right.
99% of the time, they can perform the lift using our model, using a model that we teach and coach. So another reason why the deadlift gets vilified is because a personal trainer tells you to walk up to a bar and we're going to deadlift today. But they really don't have a construct. They don't have a movement model in their mind that they're adhering to. And when you violate that, how would they know?
Right.
Because they have nothing to violate.
Exactly. I'll never forget. So I think this might have been my first ever weightlifting experience. I can't remember exactly, but it was 7th grade and it was at the end of the year. So we were about to get into the summer and then on to 8th grade. And this was our first taste of weightlifting in our junior high little weight room. And one of the coaches gets up there and he's talking about the deadlift. Okay, we're all going to deadlift. And he picked me out of the crowd. He put 135 on there. He said, all right, you're just going to put your hands on there and stand up. That's more or less what he did. Right.
Yeah.
It's, there was not much more instruction than that.
Yeah.
And I remember I did it because, of course, you're 14
Yeah, you got
and
your
you're
peers watching
you're
you.
like, I can't screw this up, right? And I remember picking that thing up, and all I could think of at the top was ow, ow. My lower back was just killing me, but I couldn't show
But
it.
you were
right?
deadlifting.
That's right. I couldn't show it. So
Kinda.
but that's
doing something.
That's the effect of.
Oh yeah.
That's effectively what instruction you get at most places.
Well, you don't get the instruction. That's the problem. I mean, you got 60 kids in a weight room and one strength coach. It's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to manage that period.
Right.
I couldn't manage that. But the only way that I could potentially attempt to manage that, we've done several strength and conditioning programs in summer for several private schools over the years, and we've had everywhere from 30 to 50 attendance over the summer program, like an 8-week program or 6 or a 12-week program. And I would bring in 2 or 3 coaches. At the time, I owned my CrossFit gyms, but I was using starting strengths model. So I would bring the coaches in. I would coach the coaches on how to teach the method. And then I would teach the primary method in the group setting. And then the coaches would break out with usually 6 lifters or 4 lifters per platform. And we had 2 classes, 2 strength training class time periods. And the students would attend one of the other classes. So we could break it up into like 30 or 25 and 25. And we would have 4 or 5 platforms running. And so the coaches that would then continue to work on the model with the lifters that I had taught in the big group setting. And so, but we had a model, we had a method to measure things to. And there were certain diagnostic angles and certain setup to the movement. And in the deadlift, we have a 5-step process like we've talked about. And we're going to talk about that. But stop blaming. Hey, folks, if you're 40 plus or if you're 30 plus, whatever you are, whoever you are, and whatever your age is and your gender, and your orientation, and you're listening to this, guess what? If you've hurt your back on a deadlift, 9 times out of 10, it's not the movement. It's the way you're performing it. It's poor technique. It's that there is no model. It may be that you've had no coaching, that you've had no instruction on what a proper deadlift looks like, or better than that, what's it supposed to feel like? If you've done deadlifts and the day before, the only thing that's sore on you is your low back, you're losing tightness in the movement, because an isometric contraction will not make your low back that sore if the rest of your body is not sore too. If everything's sore, then that makes sense. But your hamstrings should be sore. Your glutes should be sore, okay? But if you're losing tightness in the pull in a deadlift, your low back's going to be crazy sore, and you pulled incorrectly. I got to tell you how many hundreds of CrossFit workouts I've done over the years where my back was crazy sore the next day. And I was a good lifter, a reasonable lifter, with I would say good technique overall.
Right.
But during a workout, there was a Metcon, I'd go in 400-meter run in and do 6 deadlifts with 315. After a while, you get fatigued. Your back fatigues. You lose extension. You lose spinal neutral. You lose that nice flat angle, and you're actually bending during the lift. And so it's probably an eccentric contraction that's occurring now, and making you crazy sore in your low back elements. And then it hurts the ligaments, and you get creep, and you get stress on the disc and all those other things. So we want to avoid that stuff. So the second thing is just, like we said, poor technique is the first thing. The second thing is just no model or no coaching. And then the last thing is no programming. You go in, and all of a sudden today is deadlift day, and you're going to go for a heavy single, and you haven't deadlifted in 3 months.
YOLO.
You've got no business doing that.
TR or ER.
Yeah, exactly. You've got no, what the hell? What is that?
Right.
I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to that.
Yeah.
The problem is that the deadlift's simple enough, and you're probably not going to drop the bar on your head or get crushed by it like a bench press or a squat, that you feel like, I can just drop the bar from the top, which is another pet peeve of mine. You shouldn't do that.
Right.
You're only getting half of the value of the lift, but that's another conversation. But program this stuff out, people.
Yeah.
That means start in a logical, rational, linear progression and build your strength up over time with no surprises. There should be no surprises.
One thing that I have noticed about the deadlift is that if you have some time off or some time away from lifting, intentionally or otherwise, my presses will be hit the worst. They will go down the most. My squats next because I lose the groove or the technique.
Sure.
But my deadlift strength is usually hangs on pretty good.
Yeah.
And that presents a problem.
Yeah, it's a good and bad thing.
That's a good and bad, right? And that presents a problem if day one I go back and if I could do 95% of where I was.
Sure.
That's a problem if I do that because I may not be ready for it.
Yeah.
I may have deconditioned even though I still have the mechanical ability to lift that bar.
Well, and that speaks to one of the the things we've talked about in the compound lifts recently, and that is our 3 criteria. The reason why the deadlift is such an effective movement is that it really, along with the squat, helps us fulfill those 3 criteria better than any of the other lifts. Those 2 lifts, because they're so compound and you're moving the bar with by and large a pretty simple movement in the deadlift, quite a bit more complicated than squat. But number one, it allows us to use the most muscle mass in the way that we teach it, the technique that we teach it. You're using everything. You're using every single muscle in your body to deadlift in some form or fashion, whether under tension or whether under compression or traction, whatever you want to call it. You're using every muscle in your body to deadlift. Number 2, it uses the most effective range of motion. And then number 3, because we're using the most effective range of motion and we're recruiting the most muscle mass and the method that we use, we get you stronger faster. And so the deadlift really fulfills all of those criteria really well. And at the same time, it's kind of like the endurance athlete that has a little bit of strength and they walk into a CrossFit gym. They've got this crazy engine though, rhabdo time.
Ooh,
because they've got a really good engine and reasonable strength, but they've never really CrossFitted much.
They can pump
and
out
they
those
come
reps.
in and they can pump those reps out and they crush it. And in 3 days, they can't move their arms and they're in ER. Well, the deadlift is not quite like that, but the deadlift allows you to handle so much load that if you're not careful and you're not programming it right, then you can get yourself in trouble. And so you should follow a logical, simple programming model, and Practical Programming Starting Strengths programming book provides you all those answers. You know, and most people will be in a novice LP for a long time anyway. And so
let's talk about that. How do we perform this correctly, and then how do we program it correctly? What are some basic steps here?
Okay, so the deadlift is basically taught in a 5-step process. And what we'll do is Trent and I we'll teeter back and forth. We'll share off. Number 1 is going to be your stance. And so we really believe as starting strength coaches that all the lifts, the way you start the lift matters. Your setup matters, and so much more in the deadlift. I mean, it matters in all the lifts, but the deadlift, it's crucial. The setup is crucial. So step 1 is that we're going to have our lifter walk right up to the bar. They're going to get their shins about 1 inch away from the bar. They're going to have their heels about 8 inches apart, or a better way to think of that would be just inside your hips. Basically, your stance is going to be just inside your hips, not at hip width, out at the bones and the outside, but a little inside of that. And the toes are going to be turned out or externally rotated. The feet are going to be turned out about 10 degrees, okay? Just a little bit on each foot. So that puts you 1 inch away from the bar, standing right up there against the bar with a narrow stance, toes slightly turned out, ready to then grasp the bar. So step 2 is what?
So right away, just on that step 1, right away, that is closer to the bar, and it's narrower than 99% of people want to set up the first time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
this is a hip hinge, guys. The deadlift is strictly, it's a trebuchet. It's, a cantilevering motion. It is a simple hip hinge. You are hinging at the hip and standing up with the bar. But the setup has to be correct to allow us to do that with the right mechanical advantage, the right usage of our levers, and biomechanics. In other words, the way your body moves in space and time.
That's right.
So step 1 is that stance that we talked about.
Yep. And I'll only add this one thing. If you're really tall, like over 6 feet, then some people get a little frustrated because they're setting up, they hear this 5-step process and they set up a little too close to the bar. Another way to think about 1 inch from the bar, that's just a number that tends to work for a lot of different lifters. But it should be right underneath the knot in your shoelaces. basically. The knot in your shoelace should be right underneath the bar. So if you're really tall, you might need to scoot away from the bar just a bit. All right, but 1 inch works really well for a lot of different people.
Yeah,
okay, so you've done that. You've got your stance now. Now, what you're going to do in step 2 is bend over at the waist. Don't bend your knees.
Keep your knees relatively straight.
Keep them as straight as you can. Some of you won't be able to do this, and that's okay.
Tight hamstrings.
But if you can, bend over at the waist only and take your grip just outside your shins on that rough part of the bar. All right, and you're going to take your grip with your hands pronated. In other words, they're going to be, your palms are going to be facing behind you as you take your grip, and you're just going to wrap your thumbs around and let the bar sit at the base of your fingers. Another common mistake, don't let it sit way up in your palm. Let it sit right where your fingers meet your palm.
Your big knuckles.
Right where the big knuckles are. All right, that will help you avoid some nasty calluses that can cause issues down the road.
Yeah, and again, for the large majority of people out there, your grip is going to seem narrower than you thought it would have been. My grip is right on the edge of the knurling, meaning in a traditional bar, in a standard bar, we use what bar do we use?
The BNR 2.0 bar.
Yeah, BNR 2.0s. My grip, my index finger is basically right on the edge of the smooth and the knurling towards the center.
Right.
So it's fairly narrow. And the beauty behind that is if you got long arms, you have to move the bar less travel upwards. So it's great mechanically wise.
That's right. Yeah. So you basketball players might be some good deadlifters.
Yeah.
So that means that some of you ladies might be gripping a
little
bit,
inside.
A little inside with a little bit, maybe your index fingers on the smooth part of the bar.
Right.
That's okay. Right. We want a good grip here.
And this is an overhand grip too. This is not, we don't teach a switch grip or a reverse grip initially.
Yeah.
Or a mixed grip, also called. We teach an overhand grip, and we teach an overhand grip and then to hook grip into very, very high loads. I mean, I lift in the 5s and I hook grip. So some people will mix grip at a little lower weights, but it's based on how strong your grip is and how well you can lock that bar down.
That's right. Yeah. If you're having trouble gripping the bar, first thing I always recommend is use chalk.
Yes, absolutely.
Use chalk. It makes a huge difference. And only then, when you just can't hold on to the bar anymore and you've really tried hard to work your grip, then you can start thinking about switching grips. And we'll talk about that at a later date.
Yeah.
Okay, so now got...
That's step 2.
That's step 2.
Now, step 3 is going to be, now that we're grasping the bar, our knees are relatively straight, our hips are high, our back doesn't have to be set up in neutral or extension. And let's talk about that real quickly. When we talk about setting our back in neutral or extension, we're talking about basically just straightening our back so that the curve in our back is relatively extended just a little bit. So when you think about that angle, here's a good way to think about this. When you're standing upright and you bend over and touch your toes and you just let your spine flex downward, that is flexion. When you stand back up and then you arch backwards like you're about to do a back bend, that's extension. We want you to be right in the middle of that position. We want your back to be used as a straight, rigid lever. We don't want it overextended, meaning like you're leaning back too much or you're overarching your low back. We would call that kind of being sway backed, okay? And we don't want you where you're flexing. You look like a pooping dog, you know? We don't want you all flexed over, okay, and hunched. All right, we want you to be in the middle there. So we want your back to be in what we would call neutral spine or slightly extended. So step 3 would be your back's not contracted at all yet. Your knees are relatively straight. You've already gripped the bar. Now you're going to bend your knees until your shins touch the bar without letting the bar move an inch.
Yeah, don't do it. Don't let it move.
Once you grip the bar, forget that business. Once you get into stance, step 1, the bar never moves. The only direction the bar is going to move from then out is up and down.
That's right.
It's not going to roll forward. It's not going to roll backwards. It's going to stay right where it is. The whole idea of this setup being so accurate is to position you correctly for the pull. If you move the bar around horizontally on the floor, away from you and towards you, you negate the whole setup.
That's right.
Do not do that. The idea is to reproduce the same quality of lift every single rep. And that's why we use the setup.
So all of you that have been watching World's Strongest Man and you watch these enormous behemoths
roll it back and
roll it forward and roll it back, guess what? when you deadlift over 800, you can do it however you want.
Well, and the other thing is they're looking for a particular body position that they feel because of thousands of deadlifts. And if you'll watch them, they might roll it around, but eventually when they go to pull, their hip is fairly high.
That's right.
And they're deadlifting in the way that we teach.
That's right. That's right.
Our goal is to use your hips as a hinge, as a lever, with a what you would think of traditionally a higher hip than what you would probably have used if you were doing it in a gym. Most people squat a deadlift. Let's just put it that way. Most people actually squat the bar. Why would you squat a deadlift? We have the squat to build the squat strength. We want to use the deadlift to build the hip hinge strength. It's not a squat, it's a hip hinge. It's a different movement. So step 3 is basically bending the knees until the shins touch the bar, okay, and driving the knees out towards your elbows, okay? And then we go to step 4.
All right. So step 4 is setting our backs into extension, like we talked about. And we're going to do that by squeezing your chest up towards the ceiling. So I always like to describe it like this. Imagine you're wearing a t-shirt. You probably are if you're in the gym. And imagine you got a logo on your t-shirt on the front of your chest, okay? When you're bent over and you've got your shins touching the bar now, that logo is pointing down at the ground, okay? I want it to point out towards the wall in front of you, right? So how are you going to do that? You're going to have to lift your chest up, squeeze it up to the ceiling so that you can show that logo off to the front wall in front of you, right? And when you do this, you do not drop your hips.
Right,
okay? That's
right.
just to Darren's point. We're not squatting this. We're deadlifting. We're hinging it off the floor. So you've got to keep your hips frozen exactly where they are before you squeeze your chest up.
Right.
And keep them there. Then you squeeze your chest up and you'll feel your back get real tight as you squeeze up. That's what we call extension. And it's going to look like a tabletop.
Yeah.
From the side.
And I always say too that think about if I were to pour with a pitcher, if I were to pour some water on your back, I want you to create a ladle, a very open, slightly curved ladle where I could pour water onto your back and it would just pool there
just
on
pool
your back.
up in the bed.
That's
Yeah.
right. If your back's flexed or if your back's not straight, water's just going to roll right off the edge of your back.
That's right.
But if it's a little curved back there, then I could pour that water back there and it would just kind of pool in your low back. The hips being high, 99.9% of you guys and ladies are going to feel a stretch or significant tension on your hamstrings. You're going to feel a lot of tension on your hamstrings. And if the next day you wake up and your hamstrings are crazy sore and your glutes are crazy sore from deadlifting, congratulations.
Yeah, you did it right.
You did it right.
You did it right. Yeah, so if you go to a starting strength seminar, this is the point where they will yell at you and will say, it's not supposed to be comfortable.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You should be uncomfortable in this position in step 4.
Yeah.
You're not going to want to stay in this position.
No.
Right. But lean into it, right? Lean into that discomfort because that's where the good pulling mechanics happen. One thing that I like to point out too is that at this point, depending on your anthropometry, the length of your torso versus your legs and all that stuff, based on your anthropometry, your back angle will look different.
Sure.
Some people will be pretty much horizontal, parallel to the floor. Other people will have quite a bit of angle to the back.
Right.
And that's just fine. If you follow the setup that we've described up
Doesn't
through
matter.
step 4, you're in the perfect spot for you.
Right.
And don't worry about it. Right.
Well,
And
that's why as coaches, we don't use back angle as a diagnostic.
Exactly.
We use other things like the shank and where the bar is over the midfoot. Again, this lift is like the squat and the press and the other lifts that we talk about, where the bar should be relatively over the middle of the foot, which is going to be right there kind of at the top of your laces.
That's right.
And so the bar should be right over the middle of your foot. Now, if the bar is over your toe joints towards the end of your foot, that's not the midfoot, and the bar is rolled forward somehow.
That's right.
You
Yep.
probably dropped your hips.
Yep. And if that bar rolls, just stand up and redo the whole
Reset.
thing. Just
That's
redo
right.
the whole thing right now. Okay. So I'm getting tired just thinking about staying in step number 4.
Okay,
it's
so
exhausting.
step number 4, take a breath in, breathe in, hold your breath, doing Valsalva, which is basically putting force against your glottis, which is the back of your throat. And I was dealing with this with an intermediate to advanced lifter the other day, and she has a tendency to just kind of gulp air in her mouth. She's like, like she's trying to gulp air. And I said, stop gulping air. And I kept telling her to stop gulping air over several sessions. And finally I said, close your mouth, breathe through your nose. And that took care of the problem. She then shoved the air back down her throat, and then she bared down against the back of her throat with that Valsalva, with that bearing down feeling, and she was able to actually hold her breath correctly for the lift. So step 4, after you drive your knees out, after you set your back, lift your chest, create that ladle, okay, get that back into neutral or slightly extended spine, keeping the hips high and not allowing the bar to roll forward or backward. I'm getting tired. Then what you're going to do is take your breath and pull the bar up your shins and thighs and stand all the way up with the bar, and then lower the bar back down to exactly where you started following the same step.
That's
5.
right.
Just reverse step 5.
So that means that bar is going to have to slide right down your leg.
Yep.
All the way down. So don't bend your knees early. This is
right.
a very common mistake.
And remember too that you did the lift correctly. I always recommend for a novice, a new person trying the deadlift, or even a more experienced lifter who hasn't done this method, to stand up, let go of the bar, and don't move, but look at where the bar is in relationship to your foot. If the bar is forward too much, more than that inch, you probably bent your knees early on the way down, or you let the bar drift away from you. Okay, if the bar is right up against your shin and you don't have any distance at all, you probably kept your hips too high too long and didn't squat at all at the end of the lift. You see, the thing that drives the bar off the floor initially in the lift, it's your legs. So I always talk to lifters, I'll tell them, push the ground away, push the earth away with your legs like you're doing a knee extension, machine or a leg press.
Yeah,
Leg press the earth away, keeping the bar against the shin for about the first, and I don't know the distance, but maybe 4 to 6 inches off the floor. Your back angle should remain relatively constant, whatever it is, based on your measurements, for the first few inches off the floor. And then you start to open your hips up. But it's leg drive first, and then opening your hips up.
Yeah, it's we call
It's
it
a hard timing thing.
That's right. We call it a pull.
Right.
But it really starts with that push.
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
can be hard to internalize for some
Kind
people.
of a push pull.
That's right. Some people will want to just basically stand up from the bottom,
which is wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that coach told me to do, 20 years ago.
Yeah. They muted their leg drive completely.
That's right. And so that's, and part of that is our shoulders should be slightly in front of the bar, right? And the reason for that is we want that bar to be right over the midfoot, and we also want that bar to be locked against our legs, because if it floats out in front of us, then all of a sudden it's going to make us fall forward if it's heavy enough, right? And so if you try to stand right up out of the bottom, then your shoulders are going to get behind the bar too soon, and you won't be able to make the lift if it's heavy enough, right? So this, like you said, this keeps your back angle constant. Your shoulders are still in front of the bar. You push the floor. They're still in front of the bar, still in front of the floor. Now it starts to drag up your thighs, and then as you're opening up, your hips open up, and the bar tracks now underneath your shoulder, right into lockout, and you're standing up straight.
And your hips should be fully extended, meaning opened up all the way, and your shoulders should be slightly behind your hip when you're done.
That's right. Yep.
So behind it a little bit, meaning fully extended. Okay, it doesn't mean you're leaning way back. The other thing is that one mistake that newer lifters, or even more seasoned lifters, make sometimes is that when they're driving the bar off the floor, they have a tendency to stand up all the way with the bar, but they're still in hip flexion. They're just overextending their low back. They haven't actually opened their hips up all the way. So make sure that you open your hips up all the way until they cannot open anymore, until you feel like they're locked in extension. And that's what they are. They're locked in what we call extension.
And there's I always tell people, just stand up straight. Stand up straight at the top.
Right.
And if you're standing up straight, then immediately they'll be like, oh yeah, I was
Tighten your
back.
butt cheeks at the very top,
tighten your butt cheeks.
Tighten your glutes at the very top. And then you lower the bar right where you started from. Take your grip off the bar, stand back up, reset. And I would recommend for weeks, not weeks, but I would recommend for a couple weeks doing these as just singles.
That's right.
Just doing these as singles, especially if you don't have coaching eyes on you all the time. So let's Go ahead.
So yeah, I'll say that, right? So we just described those 5 steps in exhausting detail, but if you want a quick reminder, go check out our friends Barbell Logic. Go look up their deadlift, how to deadlift video. They've got these 5 steps in about a 2-minute video if you need a reminder of how to do it. And look that up for your next training session.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about programming. And this is really simple, guys, especially for the over 40 crowd. You don't have to be deadlifting every single workout. Even as a novice, you don't have to be deadlifting every single workout. Probably for the first couple of weeks, you're going to train 3 days a week for the average novice. There are some older novices that I'll only have them train twice a week to start with. But you're going to be lifting barbells 3 times a week on the average. You will be deadlifting more than likely 3 times a week for the first 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, you'll be going up 10 pounds a workout, sometimes 5 pounds if you're a little bit. Sometimes females I'll have do 5 pounds, but 10 pounds in the deadlift is not unreasonable. 5 to 10 pounds is good for the squat. Somewhere between 5 pounds on the press, and then we drop it down to 2.5 pounds very quickly, and then sometimes 2 pounds or 1 pound. And then on the bench press, it's usually 5 pounds. And so on the deadlift, we're going to be going up 10 pounds per workout. So think about it. In 2 weeks, you're going to have started from your working load that we established in your barbell startup session with you, where we taught you the barbell movements. You're going to have gone up 60 pounds, okay, in 2 weeks. At that point, I might then start inserting some chins or a accessory movement like barbell rows or chins or something like that, to where you'll be deadlifting and alternating that other accessory movement. On week 1, you might have something that looks like ABA. And on the A day, you're going to squat, press, and deadlift. On the B day, you're going to squat, bench press, and chin. Okay? It would look something like that.
Right.
And then on the A date again, you would squat, press, and deadlift. So that would be week 1 or let's say week 3. Okay?
Yeah.
And then the next week, you're going to flip those and it's going to be BAB. And you're going to have your B days on the first and the last workout of the week, like Monday, Friday, and you're going to have your A day in the middle. So now you're deadlifting twice and in 1 week and deadlifting once in the next week.
That's
deadlifting twice, deadlifting once, deadlifting twice, deadlifting once.
Now, I've actually I've had some younger athletes recently, and some athletes that had some prior strength training exposure, and I've actually been kind of stepping it out a little bit further than that.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah,
I'll have them deadlift every workout for a little while, and when that starts to get hard, the bar speed just starts to slow just a little bit. Then I'll flip them to that ABA workout schedule
for the deadlift and
for the deadlift only, right? So they'll everything will
they'll
alternate.
be doing that with the upper body lifts immediately.
That's right. And so in other words, what they'll go from is deadlift every single workout, and then they'll go to deadlift on Monday, Friday only. And I'll keep that Monday, Friday deadlift, so they're still doing twice a week for a little while, and then I'll go to that alternating where it's going to be Monday, Friday 1 week, and the next week it's only going to be on Wednesday. And I find one issue is that since we're squatting 3 times a week, sometimes that squat gets so far out ahead of the deadlift that, and I find those lifts tend to complement each other really well. Right. They might be losing some tightness in their upper back on a heavier squat because they're not handling heavy enough loads with their deadlift because they've just gotten out of balance.
They can squat more than their spine can take.
That's right.
Their legs are stronger
and
than their spine
the way to
developed.
fix that is to get that deadlift up above the squat.
No, they complement each other. All the lifts complement each other, but definitely those 2 lifts. Yeah, I like to with a younger trainee, someone under 40, and even some older trainees that have significant athletic ability. We might do the deadlift for 4 to 6 weeks.
Right.
But I would say on the average for a master's lifter or a master's athlete, I would say it's not unusual to then start alternating those lifts within 2 to 3, at the far end, 4 weeks. Your back, there's no reason for a master's lifter to have to deadlift more than, let's say, 6 times a month.
Right.
To get crazy strong, where they're alternating 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1. And even when we're doing the chins, we're building the lats. We're building the part of the back that helps the deadlift because we have to pull that bar back. And then also if we put an accessory movement like barbell rows in there, then we're building that static isometric position and we're building the lats again. That's a lat movement too. And it's a hamstring and glute movement too. So they all basically complement each other. But the deadlift, you can handle so much weight on it that it's an intense lift, man. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I deadlift once a week right now.
Yeah.
I deadlift once a week and I do barbell rows on the off day.
Right. Yeah, that's I discovered starting strength through the popular online strong lifts program.
Yeah.
And it calls for 5 sets of 5 on everything,
I know,
including the deadlift. And it's like, okay,
trash your back.
5 sets of 5 squats. That's too much for a novice, as we know, but okay, sure, that's fine. Not too bad. But 5 sets of 5 in the deadlift is brutal.
And what is the number one thing you hear from anyone who's done strong lifts? They just can't keep up with the volume very long.
Yeah.
They have to go to a program that's more more digestible, and starting strength is definitely that. And I think, if you want to learn some other really great principles about how to modify your programming, go to Barbell Prescription 2 or Practical Programming. Practical Programming is from the Asgard Company and from Starting Strength. And Andy Baker was a co-author on that. And then Andy Baker was a co-author too with Dr. Jonathan Sullivan, on Barbell Prescription. Barbell Prescription is really designed for the master's athlete.
That's right.
The master's lifter. And there's some programming recommendations in the back of programming tables, which are fantastic. And so, but you can dive a little deeper on that. But no matter what, if you're a master's lifter or a master's individual, you should be deadlifting. I don't care what your back problem is. There are very few patients that I treat and clients that I train that I will not have deadlifting in some form or fashion. It might be a variant like a rack pull, or I might be doing barbell rows or something, but we're doing some type of hip hinging along the way. And then the ultimate goal is to get them to deadlift conventionally. Right. That's the ultimate goal. And 99% of them can do from the start.
Listen closely. This is coming from the guy who had 4 back surgeries.
Don't use me as your poster child.
Right. Yeah. But how did you rehab your back?
Well, I started with nothing. I started with just what we call hip hinges in my clinic, which is just bending over with PVC using the proper setup, starting it from the top down and working my way down until I felt a little bit of discomfort or pain in my back and going back up. Started with higher reps, lower loads because of the structural challenges I had with the fusion. Right. And then I gradually went to rack pulls in a rack. And then I would also gently lower the weight down. I would never recommend, period, but I would never recommend for someone post-surgically to ever do touch and goes. You reset every single rep because you're having to reestablish the contraction of those muscles. And, they've all been cut away many times from surgery. And we could do that in another episode, talk about that specifically. But basically I went to rack pulls, and then I went to elevated deadlifts with the bar and weight. And then I slowly lowered it down to the floor height and got to where I was pulling again. And I pulled, I think my max single is 515. Yeah. So I pulled 405 for 5 the other day, just getting back into it. Felt great. My back feels better moving. I mean, I'm going to talk coming up soon in an episode about, changing the narrative about back pain and what really works and what doesn't. We've got, most humans have their value system all wrong. They have the data all wrong. Right. What you think and feel about what should be done about back pain is probably counterintuitive to what actually should be done. And we're going to talk about the real facts about that. So we're going to share some more little nuggets.
Fantastic. Yep. Fantastic.
So we want to add this in here too. If you start, let's say you start getting your deadlift up to a little bit heavier weights and your grip strength, your forearm musculature just aren't strong enough to hold onto the bar anymore.
Yeah, it starts falling out of your hands. Right. Maybe it's the 4th or 5th rep of your set of 5.
Right.
It starts falling out of your hands.
My recommendation would be, first of all, don't go to a mixed grip first. Go to a hook grip first. You can pull some crazy loads with a hook grip, but the hook grip is hard to explain on a podcast.
That's right. Yeah.
Because of the technique. But basically, you are taking your thumb and you're wrapping your thumb around the front side of the bar and then taking and putting your first finger and part of your second finger on the DIP, or the last digit of your thumb, under the bar. So you're basically locking your thumb under your first two fingers, and it creates a locking effect. It creates kind of almost like a what it was, not a wing nut, but a lock nut. It creates a locking or a clamping effect, like a pair of channel locks or something. Some of you guys will relate to that. It just locks down on it. And so basically it's your thumb literally along with the rest of your grip that's holding that bar in place. And it creates kind of a vice grip setup there. The problem is if you've never done it before, you need to be doing it with lower working loads.
That's right.
To get your thumb used to it. Sometimes I recommend taping your thumbs. Go to the Starting Strength YouTube channel, and there's a great video on the hook grip that Rip did with, I believe that, who is he? That was Chase. I think he was showing Chase how to do that.
Yep.
But there's a video on the hook grip and how to grip in the deadlift. But I would start with the hook grip before I would go to a mixed grip.
That's right. Yeah.
Now,
and on your hook grip, like you said, you probably won't be able to hook grip your working set right away. So I'd recommend
do your warm-up loads.
Do all of your warm-ups as high as you can with the hook grip, and then switch over to your conventional.
Yeah.
And
get used to it.
And get used to it. And you might even have to lower the weight a little bit.
Right.
Maybe you have to break up your work set into like a double and a triple, just so that so it's not falling out of your hands.
Right.
But give it a few workouts and you'll get used to it. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah, regripping helps too. Regripping doesn't mean you take your hands off the bar. You just regrip the bar.
Yeah.
Regripping on those last couple reps that are hard will help you because the bar has a tendency to fall down into the ends of your fingers. So just regrip the bar before you go to stand up again, and make sure you got plenty of chalk. Make sure you got a good amount of chalk.
Definitely.
On there.
It makes
get the moisture.
Way bigger a difference than you think it does.
Yes.
Especially if you're training in a commercial gym and they don't allow chalk.
Right.
You need to either use liquid chalk or something, or find a new gym because it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if we've done the hook grip, personally, I can hook grip a pretty high amount, but I cannot do my current working sets with a hook grip. It falls out of my hand even then. So I have chosen to do a mixed grip.
Correct.
And some of you that have healthy biceps, that haven't had any history of injury there, you may choose to do a mixed grip. I still recommend everybody to hook grip as long as they can. And there are some clients of mine that I've got a client who's got a history of bicep tears. He will never mixed grip.
Right.
In my gym.
It's just too much risk.
That's right. Too much risk.
And I would say that I'm more hesitant with males than I am with females.
Right.
I'm not as concerned with females mixed gripping because their biceps don't take the kind of trauma that a male's bicep does over time, especially if he's been training it all.
That's right.
Plus, males have a tendency to lose full elbow extension. So the joint gets tight, and they're really putting a lot of stress load. The bicep tendons can have some contractures in them and some scar tissue in them. And when they go to pull that bar in a mixed grip where one hand is overhand and one hand is underhand, and usually the dominant arm is the overhand and the non-dominant is the underhand arm, palm facing forward, then what they have a tendency to do is kind of flex the elbow before they pull off the floor.
Right.
And then right when they pull off the floor, it puts an immediately stretch reflex in that bicep, and it can pull that bicep off. And
That's right.
Yank it off. So I don't like that with more plastic tissue, less elastic tissue in older clients.
Yeah, so use
make sure your elbows are locked.
That's right. And use that with care. And that, again,
pull tension in the bar first.
If you're first learning how to do a mixed grip, I highly recommend you deload 10, 20%. Get used to it, because the other thing that's going to happen besides learning
bar
how
rotation.
to fully bring your arms into tension, that left arm or whatever your supinated hand is, your underhand. Yeah, you're also going to have
palm forward hand.
It's going to want to windmill away from you.
Right.
And so you've got to learn how to really use your lats to suck that back into your shin. So
on your underhand grip hand, the palm forward hand, you really have to pull your lats tight and pull back.
That's right.
If not, as you go to stand up, you're using your bicep on that side, and the bicep curls the elbow.
Right.
It wants to push the bar forward and away from you, and so the bar, like Trent said, will windmill or turn away from your supinated or palm forward hand towards your palm backwards hand or your pronated hand, your overhand grip. And so, elbows locked out, pulling the bar back. Also, one thing we didn't talk about in the deadlift movement was this. Right before you go to pull that bar off the floor, put tension in the lift. I like to say, hear the collars clank a little bit, or hear the sleeves in the bar clank. So you've got the bar to help pull you down into position. So pull tension in the bar before it actually lifts off the floor, and then drive it with your legs and extend your hips.
That's right.
So,
and so one last word on the grip is if you have no plans to compete in a strength meet, then there's no shame in using straps at some point in your training career. You may get to the point where you've overhand gripped and then you've hook gripped and you said, I don't really want to take the risk of doing a mixed grip.
Right.
So if don't let your grip limit your ability to make progress in the deadlift, go ahead, use straps, use those for your heavy pulls, but pull all of your warm-ups with that overhand or hook grip. So you're still training your grip. But that's the main thing I wanted to leave with, is that don't let your grip be a limiting factor, because training your back is more important than training your grip.
Right.
So,
and make sure that you're doing the other lifts consistently, that you're doing the press and the bench and the squat and the other lifts, because and chins too, because that'll all build your grip strength.
That's right. It'll all come along. So sometimes it just happens, one happens
Some
quicker
people
than
have
the
small
others.
hands, they have smaller forearm mass, but they got strong legs in the back. They need to be lifting. So
that's right.
Yeah. No, I'm good with that too. So
all right. I think we killed it.
Yeah. Hey guys, thanks for joining us to talk about the deadlift today. If you want to hook up with us on Instagram, go to @40FitRadio. You can touch base with Trent at Marmalade Cream and myself at Dr. Deaton. You can also find us on the webs or the interwebs, whatever you want to call it. And we're at 40fit.com. You can click on the podcast tab, get more information. Or you can email us, info@40fit.com. We'd love to hear from you. As we're putting these podcasts out, we want to know what you want to hear. And we're going to have more interesting podcasts in the future, more topics that are outside of just strength training and outside of fitness, but more health related too. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for being a part of the 40 Fit Nation.
See you next week.
Later.